Please welcome Editor-in-Chief at People Magazine and host of People Everyday podcast, Janine Rubenstein.
From People, and I gotta tell you, watching all of that, it immediately took me back to hearing that one theme song, Comic View on BET, Kevin and Cheese, Kevin, now you remember that, right? I would hear that, and I was a little girl, and I would sneak and try and watch, because I knew what they were doing up there was magic, and my mom was like, that's for grown folks, go to bed. And I'll tell you this one more, I was 14, when a small group of friends and I got together and we got our first job at a movie theater. And we all almost lost our first job at that movie theater because the original Kings of Comedy had just come out and we weren't supposed to be watching it, but we snuck in. And if you imagine 3 little black girls like crouching down in the front seats, cracking up, dying laughing, because it was just so good. And we almost got that, and we stole some of the pretzels to eat while we were watching, so that's why we almost got fired. But I say that to say that 90s era was my introduction to the genius of black comedy, and then you watch what we just watched, and you learn all of that, and you see the history and the power and the importance of black comedy. And so I am so excited to be here. Thank you, A&E, and thank you to Right to Offend and Tribeca Film Festival for having me and this esteemed panel that we are about to bring out. I am so excited. I'm gonna move myself down this way so I can give a warm welcome. I've always wanted to say this like this. Coming to the stage, first and foremost, please welcome just stand-up comedian and host of CNN's United Shades of America, W. Kamau Bell. Next up, we have stand-up comedian and last comic standing winner, Alonzo Bowden. Let's welcome actress, director, and daughter of the late, great Richard Pryor, Rain Pryor. Mr. Christian Gregory, son of legendary comedian Dick Gregory. Going behind the camera, co-directors of Right to Offend, Jessica Sharif and Mario Diaz. And lastly, but definitely not least, we have executive producer Lauren Hammond. All right. So I want to kick things off. I shared mine, but I want to know all of yours. Who was the comedian or the moment, the bit, that made you fall in love with black comedy? I'll start with you. We're just gonna go down this way. Okay. Now you're first.
It's easy for me. When I saw Chris Rock's Bring the Pain and the bit that became the famous bit, Black People versus Niggers, I like, you're laughing and all of a sudden your mouth is just open like, I didn't know you could do that.
Yeah.
And so that's the bit that made me, that really changed my idea of what black comedy could be, and what comedy could be.
What about you, Alonzo?
It's hard to say just one, but I'm gonna say Robin Harris. He was the quickest mind I had ever seen. It was amazing to watch him. And I got to see him, before I became a comic, I got to see him live. The best bit I ever saw was Bernie Mac on Def Jam. I ain't scared of you motherfuckers. That was the greatest 5 minutes I've ever seen done. It changed the game.
Ray?
Richard Pryor.
Well, there you go.
Only because he could come in the room when I was crying, and his idea was to run in the room naked to make me stop crying.
I love it. For me, I'm gonna follow your lead, Rain, and say Richard Pryor. Let me qualify it though, because in the Gregory household, Richard Pryor was just an icon. I mean, my dad, we knew all, and I'll be very brief here, we knew all, this is like a family reunion watching this here for us. And so all of these folks were wildly funnier off stage than their professional acts. So for me, it was just gatherings. And when black comedy, you realize, and it was just family. And so that's what this feels like here, and that's what this film feels like. So, but if I had to pick one, I'd say Richard Pryor. And then the first time I snuck in and saw Eddie Murphy Raw, because I was underage. So it's two, because I'm a Gregory, I violate time, so two.
That's a perfect transition, because for me, 100%, my first just comedy discovery ever was Eddie Murphy. And not only that, I learned how to speak English as a teen, and I did it quite literally through, I was gonna say, getting high and watching Raw and Delirious every week.
Oh no, that's how you learned how to speak English.
With my girlfriends, and we quite literally all learned how to speak English by watching Eddie Murphy, so.
Oh my goodness, those conversations. What about you, Mario?
I just remember that I went to see Raw. I skipped school and I went to see Raw with a bunch of guys from high school, and I got into big trouble for doing that. Because I was, I was young. I wasn't supposed to even be in the theater. Can I say that my first influence of black comedy was my family?
Yeah, speak out.
My uncles and my grandmother and her sisters were really funny, and they cut me down to size from a very young age, and that's, that my humility comes from that.
I'm another underage Eddie Murphy fan for sure. Definitely Delirious. When he turned the mic into an ice cream cone and I got my ice cream, that was enough. And the red leather suit, how could you not love that?
Wow. Well, I'm going to take it to the filmmakers over here. I want to know why this film, of all the choices that you have, why this one? And then also, what was the text chain like when everything started happening recently and you were like, we are on time in comedy? So I'll start with you, Jessica.
Yeah, like we were saying earlier, the very first, we were on Largemont, pitching ideas back and forth, and it came quite literally from Eddie Murphy, trying to find something like this and not understanding why this didn't exist, and why there's obviously amazing separate films about some of these legends, but nothing that kind of traces that lineage. And then as we started diving in, and it was when it clicked, was looking at it through that lens of social change and social justice and pushing boundaries and really changing society in a way that can only be called activism, whether or not it was, intended to be so.
Yeah, because I think initially we just, we were pretty ambitious. We wanted to do the entire history of black comedy.
Our first,
nobody would buy because it would be 20 episodes, and it would be impossible to produce. But we talked about it, and one of the things that I think we hit upon really early was this tradition of socially conscious humor in black comedy. And then that was terribly exciting for us, and then everything sort of fell into place after that. When things started happening, the thing is, comedians started talking, because that's, one of the things we talked about a lot was, the dual role that comedians have in society. And you don't want me to talk about this. You should have these guys talk about how.
I will.
Yeah. How it's, they make us laugh, but they also make us think.
I'm going to kick it over to the two active working comedians we have here. I want to start with you, Alonzo. Well, I think Chris Rock says it there in the film that there is that twofold, that line that comedians dance along, and you kind of decide where you fall on that line of offending, of bringing humor. Is that a choice that you make, or do you just do what you do?
I just do what I do. The only time I worry about offending them is if it's a corporate gig paying me a lot of money. And I'm like, well, we don't want to make them mad. No, the freedom of comedy is that we are the writer, the director, the talent, so nobody's gonna tell you what not to say. As far as offensive, what I was taught early on was, don't forget to be funny. You can say anything, just don't forget to be funny. And that is something that, as a matter of fact, today, watching Dave Chappelle do it, where Dave will not be funny for a long time and then be hilarious.
Yep.
And as a comic, it takes a lot of bravery to not get a laugh for that amount of time, because we're so used to getting them. So, but yeah, that's where the line is for me, if that's a line. Don't forget to be funny, but say whatever you want.
Kamal, they kind of split it up there, like, especially when it came to Dick Gregory's legacy, activist versus comedian. And I feel like, just having watched your work, you kind of navigate a similar duality, but do you feel that way? And is that a choice that you ever felt you had to make, all things considered, with how America is?
I mean, I think Dick Gregory made it clear that there's a difference between being a stand-up comic on stage, speaking truth to power, and then actually going out into the streets and speaking truth to power.
Yep.
And I think sometimes, and I've been in this way, you get caught up in going, yeah, that joke just ended racism. like that was the definitive joke. No more racism. And then you go outside and go, oh, there's still racism. So I think Dick Gregory really made it clear that there's a difference, and I think I'd be aware of the difference. So when if I do a joke on stage and sometimes people will call me an activist, I'm like, that's not activism. Now an activist might use that joke to help them explain what the point is, but activism is actually a job that you have to show up for, and as Dick Gregory did famously, he made a choice. Like, these aren't the same thing. And so, yes, I do think there's a line, but as Dick Gregory proved wonderfully, you can be a comedian and be useful as a person who is helping assist with activism.
Got it. And do you feel like the role, I think Kevin Hart said this in the film, the role of the Black comedian has changed? If we looked at that whole history and how you see your role in society today, do you feel like there's a big difference?
I mean, I think that, you can be a white comedian and never talk about what's going on in the world. I think it's pretty hard to be a Black comedian and never talk about what's going on in the world without the crowd being like, where is this dude from? Like, and I think you have, I mean, even, I don't know, do Black people, is there a Black Carrot Top, Alonzo? You know what I mean? Like,
Not that I know of.
you know what I mean? But even like a Black Carrot Top would have to be like, I know I'm making fun things out of these hangers, but also Black Lives Matter. You know what I mean? You couldn't just do.
You don't know how hard it was for me to get these hangers.
Exactly.
I can't just go to the hanger store. I gotta work to get hangers.
It's a working comedian right here. So I think that is a, whether you want it or not, there is a pressure on, if you're being, as a Black person in America, if you have a platform, sometimes you gotta say something.
I think, if I may tag along on this one.
No, I'm done with that point.
Okay, well you tried to end racism with a joke. Your joke wasn't good enough. Perhaps if it had been a better joke, racism would have ended that night.
You're making good points, sir.
No, but the other thing with Black comics and comedy that has changed is we're now so much more involved in every aspect of society, right? So now it's like racism's there and racism's always there, but then you're a Black person, and I've had this come up, it's like, we still deal with the economy, we still deal with war and other issues, but we have our point of view with these things, and we're talking about these things also. So it's not just one fight. It's like, yeah, this is a fight, like you were saying, but on top of that, you have to deal with everything else in life from a Black perspective. So the Black comedian, I think, what we talk about, our topics, it's even broader now, but we're still coming from a Black perspective.
In today's climate, do you feel that pressure of being offensive, of offending? Was it something that you felt freer to do before the most recent events? Maybe some smacks, maybe some attacks. Because that has been said. There's been a lot of comedians who've been like, this is not what I signed up for, what the hell?
I'm probably not gonna get slapped on stage. Just saying, I'm kind of bigger than most club security. So I tell them I'm a lot bigger up close. You might think about it, but no, that is the ultimate outlier situation to actually physically attack a comedian. And I will tell you honestly, working in clubs, that's the freest place that we work. There's a lot more talk about offending people, censorship, cancel culture, than is what's really going on. In the clubs, we're still talking, we're still doing comedy. Nobody's going to a club and worried about, I'm gonna offend this group because they're blank. You know, and the other thing is, and it's, people talk about it in the documentary, when you have someone in the audience who is an other, right? They love for you to make fun of them, because everyone's afraid to. You know, so if I see a guy in a wheelchair and I joke with him, I'm like, I ain't scared of you, there's stairs. He ain't coming up. And he's laughing, see how they all got tight? He's laughing his ass off at that because he gets it. And now he is part of the audience that, just like I made fun of these 5 other people. And that hasn't changed. You know, people at a comedy club, people walk in knowing you might talk about anything, and they're gonna laugh at it or not gonna laugh at it. But all this talk about the cancel culture and this and that, it happens on larger stages, it happens with TV, and it happens when you hear that 30-second snippet of a 45-minute show.
Rain and Kristen, I want to bring this next question to you about watching your fathers, your heroes up there in this documentary. Were there any kind of, I guess, caveats or anything like that you were like, this has to be done for my father's legacy? And how did you communicate that? So I'll start with you, Rain.
You mean in terms of when they were making?
Yeah, putting this together and making sure.
You know, I didn't feel like, oh, this had like to anyone that I needed something to be said or done. I think the fact that a documentary was being made on Black comedy that included Richard Pryor, that included Dick Gregory, was so important and imperative because they were so part of the counterculture and so part of the civil rights movement that allowed people like my father to say what he wanted to say on the stage at a time when you could really say it. You know, I love the comedians today, and I'm still waiting for that moment to hit again, that spark that we had back in the early, 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Yeah.
Because it was a different time to be able to speak that truth to power than we have right now. You know, we might go in the club and you might pick on the guy in the wheelchair, but not all of us are doing that. And I think that's the difference in what the culture, where we're at right now. You know, when we want to counsel someone like a Dave Chappelle, but he's actually speaking truth to power and saying the things the people in the audience are thinking about. He's just saying them. And we hate him for it instead of trying to understand our own communities and culture. And that's what my dad did. That's what Dick Gregory was about, at least when Dick came over to our house. He was that way.
Consistently. The man had one gear.
Yeah.
And I would just say that for me, I'm incredibly protective of my dad's legacy because he worked so incredibly hard. And he was never one for patting himself on the back. As I shared with both Mario and Jessica, I said, after watching this a few weeks ago, I said, you know, what a blessing when there's people who want to tell your story, who clearly have love for you. Because there's a lot of folks who have told Dick Gregory and many other stories that they're looking at our culture, not fully understanding, and it's not rooted in love. I mean, this story was told through a kind of long-form journalistic lens. And, you know, I'd said it in the documentary, my dad was a die-hard news junkie. As a family, we copious amounts of news. And so seeing this and just showing how real and human beings all of these folks were. I mean, Paul Mooney and I would have dinner regularly, and just, you know, insanely funny. I mean, you know, Dick Gregory going to the dentist could be its own reality show. And so to see the world kind of seeing the other sides of these folks is special. So for me, no, it was clear there was no agenda. It was rooted in love, and I love that because Dick Gregory was an honest broker. Love him or hate him, he was going to say what was on his mind. So, and this did just that. And it came off like a little bit of a love story to Dick Gregory. So I was sitting there watching, it's like, holy smokes. I was like, I know my dad is watching down having some of the editorial decisions that were happening here. So, no, it was incredibly uplifting.
Love it. Lauren, I want to ask you something about what was included in the film, and I think it was done really well. Bill Cosby and the decision that was made. I know on the back end, on the executive producer level, on the director level, on involving the talent probably in making that decision and how it was done. How did that come about?
Well, I don't think you can tell this story without telling the story of Bill Cosby. And there was a lot of discussion, obviously, about the best way to frame him, the best way to bring him into the story. And I think Mario and Jess did just an amazing job of doing it very elegantly. And I think we also talked about it when we just left the screening. We were like, that bite right there was perfect. Like the television turns off right there, and then you have
Kamau comes
you
on.
have Kamau come back. Like there was no other way, right? And DL, there was no other way to really bring it in there. And it's what they've done with this film. It is a journalistic film. This is something that is telling the truth. And if we had excised that, it would have been really glaring. So, I think that it was the right decision.
I like that. Jess and I both come from, so that feels good to hear. But I also wanted to say that we made a decision. We obviously wanted to touch on Cosby, but we also didn't want to litigate what was going on today. We only wanted to, place Cosby in that particular period of time and talk about, what he represented, what he meant, what he did not do. And so, we thought it was an integral part of the story.
You have to address it, because if not, you're going to spend the entire Cosby section thinking about it. And so how to do that, again, to go back to Lauren's point of doing that in a way that's concise, that's funny. But that also lets us, all of us, right, watching it, just take an exhale and be like, all right, we've addressed this. Now let's go back to the story at hand.
Kamau, what did you say when you saw that you were the one breaking the ice on something like that?
I mean, at the time that I sat down for this interview, I was in the middle of my own film addressing Bill Cosby. So I think when in that bite, I think I was like a little half laugh because I knew at the point, I was like, they don't know what I'm currently doing. And I was like, and so I felt like, so it made a lot of, I could understand why, I was saying that because I'd probably just come from the edit on my own project. So, it sort of feels like it worked the way it was supposed to work.
Let's talk about the Nword. And Kristen, I know you're going to be able to chime in on this quite clearly, but does it still have a place, an important place, I would say, in Black comedy? It had a very important kind of just cultural shifting place in Black comedy when it was introduced in the way that it was. Richard Pryor, all of that. Does it still? I'll start with you, Kristen.
I think similar to the Cosby discussion we've just had, you can't just make stuff disappear. We can't go back and change history. Obviously my dad's first book was called Nigger, so Nigger was something that, very good, that we, but it wasn't a word that was said a lot in the home. It wasn't something that caught us off guard. It was something that, there was a time when Black people were wildly offended if you called them Black. They wanted to be colored or Negro. These things through time and as the lens changes. So I think we give the word too much power still. Not all of us, definitely not all of us, but I think collectively, and I think Gen Zs and millennials, because they heard the way their folks talked about it, it's just, no one can say it now. And I think that, and I'll say this quickly, there was, it may have been the NAACP, and so they were having a mock funeral for the N-word. and it's awkward for me to say the N-word, but I'm saying it here, but that's in my house. My dad's frowning at me for using that. So my dad and I happened to be, it was in Detroit, and so we laughed at the funeral, one of the few times in our life we ever laughed at a funeral, but we went to the repast, and for other reasons, but this was not because we were mourning, or maybe we were, but I never heard the word nigga used so many times than all the folks who had just walked down. There's some brinksmanship in games, and if we're not careful, it went from being, it was what preceded it or followed, like, hey, we're gonna hang that nigger, kill that nigger. Well, it depends, what intent. A word on its own shouldn't have that much power, because if there's not a counter word that we can use, and by trying to do away with it, we actually make it stronger. And that's a disservice to all Black people. So I don't we republished my dad's book, and honestly, I wanted to change the title because he did it like your dad mentioned. It was to be tongue-in-cheek and to show the world that white people, hey, you called us this, now I'm gonna make you uncomfortable with it. Well, that's no longer the case anymore. And a lot of people miss out on the innards of the book where the real magic is because they get caught up on the name. So the book's available on Audible. And the reason I mention that, one of the largest companies in the world, I had to sign an agreement with their lawyers that I could hold the book up, but I couldn't say the name while I was speaking on Audible's campus. And I said, well, mission accomplished. Dick Gregory wanted to make white people uncomfortable with this word. You can't get a bigger white company than Audible. And now they want me, and I was glad to sign it because I was smiling saying, this book's still doing what he wanted it to do. Make you uncomfortable, not Black folks uncomfortable. But I think it gets too much coverage, too much attention, and I'll be glad, like Negro in Color, when it falls off and we can really focus on the real things that are negatively impacting Black people.
Rain, I want to get your take because your dad opened up about his changing his view.
It's interesting because I just had that experience. I just went to Nigeria and I was in with an African tribe for about 7 days, very intently. And what's interesting to me is that I understand my dad's need to then remove it from his vocabulary, because when you are there, you don't see niggers in Africa. You don't see it. There's no one looking over their shoulder waiting for someone to come up and arrest them and get them. It's a completely different view when you see yourselves as kings and queens and productive in the marketplace, and you're working and the children have people to take care of them. It's a different kind of society, a different kind of outlook. So to me, the word doesn't sit for me in the way that it used to back in the 70s and the 80s, where it kind of hits you when somebody said it. Now I look at them and say, oh, they haven't learned. It's more like, oh, they haven't been educated on what Blackness is. It's like we call ourselves here African Americans. We're not. We're not Americans. On our passport it says US citizen. It does not say American citizen. So there's a lot of things in terms of my Blackness that I will never identify with the word nigger. But I don't care anymore if you say it. It just shows me your ignorance, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Kamal, how does it stand in your comedy? Is it something you even think about?
No, I don't. I just you asked the question like, are we still talking about? I get that like we talked about the film, but I was like,
do you even think about it?
No, I it's like I wouldn't say I use it like salt and ketchup, but I would use it like paprika. It's not for everything, but it may make something taste really good. You know what I mean? It's not sriracha. You know, just it's like cumin, just a bit. You know what I mean? So I think I've said nigger way more on stage than off stage, quite frankly. Just because on stage I'm saying it for a reason. Whereas off stage, it's just not a part of my common parlance, which you can tell because I said common parlance.
Well, there we go.
Being silly. Thank you.
What about you, Alonzo?
It depends on the comic, right? Because to some comics, they use it all the time, but that's just how they talk, right? So I don't judge them for it or anything. I'll use it on occasion. I'm like you. I hate saying N-word. That sounds so ridiculous to me. I'm like, we're allowed to say it. You know, we don't have to say N-word. We don't need the code. We say nigga all the time, you know, so. Do I use it? I use it as an example. I have one bit where I use it as an example of words and the power of words. And sometimes I use it, but I probably use it more off stage, like when we're backstage talking basketball. You know, then it comes up, then he's just talking.
He called me nigger like 8 times.
Well, if the shoe fits, it's all. This is nothing new between him and I. No, but when I hear people use it, like you were talking about the funeral, one of the funny things to me that I was laughing about when they had the whole thing, this is gonna be the end of the N-word, right? It was like the early 2000s.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know who 10 years ago said, I don't want to be called yo nigga? Flavor Flav and Public Enemy. Before anybody said it, they said it. And I was like, and nobody was listening. And now all of you think you're on something revolutionary, but they explained a long time ago, you know, and like you said, with Richard saying that, you know, and travel is something a lot of people don't do. And when you get to see other cultures, you see that it's different. But, you know, so now are we gonna go back? This is my problem with the whole cancel and change. Are we gonna go back and change the name of Bicentennial Nigga? Like, are we gonna change the name of that record?
Good idea.
You know?
Fill out that petition right now.
Yeah. So it's a word used in the Black community, different frequency in different parts of our culture. And I'm okay with that. I'm not gonna tell somebody that they can't say it. But as a comic, you know, it's also like, hey, is this a crutch? When it's a crutch, then you're like, okay, that you can't do that. Like, work harder. Work harder. Don't make that the punchline.
Some niggers are louder than others. Like, when Cat Williams says it, I don't hear it. But if a white comic says it, it's super loud. And I feel for me, it's all about who's delivering it and why they're delivering it and what they mean by it.
Ray, you talked about your dad and travel and taking that time, and it's something that we saw with Dave Chappelle as well. Just kind of having that moment of realizing, wait a second, at me or with me? You know, and I'm wondering for you, Alonzo, and for you, Kamal, have you had that where it's like, are they laughing at me? Or are they laughing with me? And what am I gonna do about that when it comes to my writing, when it comes to the work that I'm putting out there? I'll start with you, Alonzo.
Well, you know, the thing about that is that hardcore racist, right-winger, whatever, they don't go to comedy shows. They're angry people, they're not laughing. So they're, really, I mean, it's true, they're not gonna be in the room. Now, I will tell you that Michael Richards, okay, that was a famous example. When Michael Richards said nigga, everybody knew what he was saying. There was no ambiguity. He was saying it at somebody, and it was an insult. And it completely, and he wasn't that good of a comic to begin with, but it ended his stand. It was like, you can't do stand-up anymore because as people ask me about it, I said, listen, I've been heckled by all kind of people, and I never led with, hey, you blank. You know what I mean? Their race, their culture, their religion, or whatever wasn't part of it. So, I don't know how I don't know how to draw these lines. I'm gonna say that. I don't know how to draw these lines. I don't hear them using it at me, and in my act, I'm not using it at anybody. And again, sometimes I make a point about the word, and sometimes I just use the word randomly or whatever, but I'm not using it at anyone. And audiences can always tell. Audiences feel the intent of the comic on stage, like you were saying about when white people say it, you know, you always hear, how come black people can make fun of white people can't make fun of black people? There are white comics who make fun of black people because it's very funny and they have no hate in their heart when they do the joke.
Yep. Kamal, what about you? More broadly, like, have you had a moment where you were like, how am I being perceived by everyone and by the other?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, that was the moment which I was like, when there's something I'm trying to do and I'm trying to get across, and I don't feel like this audience or the audiences I'm in front of. There's a time in a comedy where you go, you have to whatever audience is in front of you, you have to make them laugh. You have to learn how to be funny. So you do all the one-nighters and the open mics and just whoever's there, you got to make laugh. At some point, I think you have to decide, who do I actually want to laugh? And then, luckily, we live in a time where you can go find that audience.
Yeah.
I think for a lot of times, for many years in comedy, you used to show up at the comedy club and hope your audience was there. But I think that happened for me was like, the people who are at the comedy club aren't the people that I'm hanging out with and life. Where do I find those people? And that's when I went out and started renting small black box theaters and doing my own show. Because I was like, if 3 people show up, at least they'll be the 3 right people. So for me, it's about like, at some point as a comic, who are you writing the jokes for? If the people at the comedy club happen to be those people, great. But if they're not, you can go find those people.
Just makes me think of what that must have been like for your dad, Dick Gregory, Christian, to go into that Playboy club and not be prepared for who he had those jokes for.
And I think it's important because I don't spend a lot of time, just like we're talking about the word nigger a moment ago, don't spend a lot of time focused on that. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about how white folks thought about what my dad was doing. But if I take a moment to do it, at that time to have, you know, as I said, flat-footed comedian speak to white folk, what did that do to these Southern races when they went back home and saw, hey, I just saw the future. I saw what's coming. I saw what's next. Here they went to the Playboy Club, which at that point for, you know, I mean, they're businessmen, but you know, that's, you know, quote unquote businessmen. They're coming up there. This was the biggest night probably potentially in their life. And to walk out there and to come there and see a black man walk out and very intelligently read basically the entire, you know, front page of the newspaper and break it down for you in ways that they couldn't have broke it down. Then to have to deal with that and unpack that. So I'm done now dealing with what they thought about it, but so I don't spend much time thinking about that. But as far as what it meant for black folks, and I think it's important to say, it wasn't like black comedians back then were like, oh, we have to perform for white folks. Like, my dad never thought that. He was prepared for a larger audience so he could still educate and enlighten and show by example. Even comics who don't intend to be activists, just your presence being there doing certain things. I mean, you could be a, you know, poor black or brown person anywhere in the world and watch the Obamas arrive on Air Force One and you felt uplifted by that optic. Images are so profoundly important. And so my dad understood that. That's why, you know, there were no white folks hanging on the walls in our home. We had Nelson Mandela, we had all, and you talk about going to Africa, that as a Gregory's, as a family, like 10 little ducklings, we were all over sub-Saharan Africa. So my dad, all of us had to go to HBCUs. It wasn't an option. And so it wasn't just doing something and then raising his children differently. It was really who he was. And so for us, it was that moment we always heard about, but it was only a year or so that my dad was at his peak before he left completely. And so I didn't realize that until after my dad passed and doing research for projects like this, that he walked away literally while he was still ascending. And it speaks a lot about the times, similar to now, early 60s. But it also speaks a lot about who he was and what was, I mean, he grew up with nothing. So he knew he wanted to do more than just tell jokes and make people laugh. And now everyone's doing it because we have social media, you can straddle the fence. And I'm fans of all, both W. Kamau and Zoe. And I see so much of Dick Gregory and so much being done. And I just wish that more people realize it's so much more than jokes and the power they have.
The picture you paint of him being at his height and then just seeing that through line, thinking of Richard Pryor taking that time, thinking of Chappelle coming up and having to take that time and grapple with that is powerful. I want to go into some of the nuts and bolts of putting this together. How did you choose who you chose to be featured and why? I mean, we won't name names or anything like that, but were there reasons for people not making the cut?
That's a loaded question.
Sorry.
I want to say this before we get into that. I think, because I just want to touch on something you said earlier, which was that you felt the love for your father in the series, and I think for both of us, there was no, I mean, we absolutely had to begin our story with Dick because he crossed the color line in comedy. And that, you know, that was transcendent, and it really set the tone. But also, he was such a passionate activist afterwards. And so, you know, that duality is very nicely set up in his case. And so we spent a lot of time with him initially. And likewise with Richard, you know, he opened up the language. He really stretched things out in a way that was revolutionary. You know, we call it the Black Comedy Revolution. So I just, for us, it was really important that you guys were in there. And also, by the way, as documentarians too, I did not know about Elizabeth. I had no idea that she was teaching, the etymology of the Nword. And that was amazing. And also she was so lovely, and she received us at Smith, and it was the middle of the pandemic. They weren't letting anyone into those buildings, but they let us, which was great, because she advocated for us. I want Jessica to speak, but we mapped this out. We had a massive outline for this thing. It was maybe 40 pages or something of just research and how we wanted to piece it together. And so then we went after people who would speak to that. And the two gentlemen you have here are perfect examples of Black comedians who are sort of carrying this tradition on.
And to add to that, I think Maria touched on our outline. I mean, it was insane. We had like bio elements. It was the breadth of what we're trying to cover is so big that in order to have a through line and to get to this finished narrative that's cohesive and that makes sense, we sort of landed on this idea of, all right, our lens is this idea of social change, right? So we always have to come back to that. So we have to find people who can speak to that, right?
Yeah.
And we have to, whether it's the comedians that are featured, interviewees, whatever it might be, it always came back to that through line of how do we tell this particular version of the story that we're telling? How do we always come back to pushing boundaries, right? Breaking down walls, to giving it to the white power structure, to how do we keep on that main through line? And I think that was something that both for the story and the narrative that we're telling and for the voices that we're bringing in to help us tell the story the right way, that was sort of our guiding light.
And I want to say, I don't know if Brad and Amir are here from A&E, but during the post-production phase of this, you naturally fall in love with certain aspects of these stories. You want to tell Moms Mabley's biography, which is incredible. But you have to kind of eliminate certain things, and they were really good at keeping us on track. Just what Jessica was talking about, just making sure that our main focus, our main thrust was, comedians and this story of social change.
Yeah. In journalism, we call it shooting puppies. At least that's what my professor said. You gotta shoot your puppies. Sorry, it has to go. Lauren, from the executive producer standpoint and working with Kevin Hart, who had a big role in this, what was that like for you in making it come together from a macro standpoint?
Well, I mean, the importance, I executive produce this for Time Studios, and the importance of telling a story like this with a brand like Time, I can't say enough about that, because we're standing on 99 years of legacy journalism, and sometimes you have to reframe that legacy. You have to take a look at who was inside the red border, and I think that Mario and Jess took a very, very close look at that, and we told this story, and Heartbeat was incredibly helpful to us. Kevin, obviously sitting down to speak about this is really, really important. He's one of the biggest comedians in the world today. So just having him on board with us was really, incredible.
All right, well, my last question to you all is gonna be another down the line, starting with you, Kamal. Who's got now and who's got next? Who's got now and who's, it's simple, right? Comedian-wise, who's got now and who's got next?
Pass.
All right, fine, we can focus on who's got next if you're not comfortable with who's got now. But is there a comedian, because we're looking at a particular time period, and it's gonna stop at a point, but it doesn't. It never stops. There are teenagers out there who are looking at you guys saying, that's what I'm gonna do, that's what I wanna do. And they have their own struggles that they're speaking to. And it's gonna look different, it's gonna be different, but it's gonna be based off of that legacy that you guys are talking about. So if you don't wanna talk about who's got now, I mean, both of you kinda got now, but who's got next?
I'd say Kevin Hart still has now. To be fair, he's got to slow that down. I mean, I think that when you look at specials, there's so many comedy specials right now, and so many that there used to be like one on HBO 3 or 4 times a year, and that was it. And now there's so many that to me it's interesting the ones that do break through, and as black performers, the ones that break through and do something that we haven't seen before. So you have to talk about Gerard Carmichael as someone who is has announced himself in a new way, someone we thought we knew and thought we understood, and has now flipped the script with that last special. So for me, is he now and next? I think that's somebody that I like when a comic goes, it's the same thing George Carlin went through, your dad, Richard Pryor went through, where they go, no, I know I told you who I was, but this is actually who I am.
What about you, Lonzo?
Dave Chappelle got now. You know, I don't even think it's close. And what tells you that is the way comics watch him. Because we watch him and we're like, wow, like his mind, the way his mind works and things he's doing and saying, you know, the best compliment a comic can give you is when we're like, man, I wish I thought of that. You know, and that's what he does on a regular basis. So I say he's got now. As far as who has next, like Kamal was saying, I don't know. You know, the guy who has next might be some guy in Sydney, Australia, or London. There's so many outlets now with the internet, right? Because we have the streaming specials, but then you also have people putting up their own specials on YouTube. You have TikTok videos. You have all of these different ways that people can be seen, and who knows which one will catch on, rise to the surface, you know, get that movie deal, get that TV spot or whatever, and just totally blow it up. You have no way of knowing. Tiffany Haddish, you know, nobody saw that coming. Nobody saw Tiff coming, and those of us who knew Tiff, we all love her. She was like our little sister and brilliant and funny and this and that. But then she was like, boom, I'm gonna take over the world. And it was like, why didn't you tell me you were gonna do that? You know, so I don't know who's got next. They're out there, and who knows what platform they'll come from.
I saw Tiffany coming. I watched Girls Trip, and I went there for, you know, the Queen Latifah and the Jada of it all, and I left like, wait a second.
Well,
who is this?
I'm talking 15 years before Girls Trip. I'm talking when she came into the Laugh Factory as a kid and hung out and did, you know, was hosting shows and this and that, and didn't follow any of the rules of comedy.
Wow.
And so yeah, you don't know. You don't know, you know, she didn't follow any rules, and then she made her own lane and blew it up. So by the time she hit Girl Trip, we had to tell her, like, you're a movie star now, because she still didn't know it. She was still just being her.
Wow.
She's fantastic.
What about you, Randy?
You know, I have to say, yeah, you have your Kevin Harts, your Chris Rock, Dave Chappelle, Wanda Sykes, you know, like I can name anyone for now. But I think, you know, when you look to the future, that it could be some kid that's going to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival for the first time this summer, and they're there sharing a new voice, a new outlook, and being able to riff, because that's where you can go to riff. You know, they're out there on in the fringe circuits, working and doing. They're in the hood. You know, they're in my hood in Baltimore. Like, that's where the next is gonna be. So I can't say who, but I can say it's one of those young people out there, you know, who are part of a new movement that we haven't even really touched on yet.
Kristen?
Quickly, comedy is so subjective, so it's difficult. So I'm going to follow my good dear brother W. Kamal's lead and pass on the first part and talk about the next.
Somebody's gonna be, Dick Gregory's son said I was.
I don't need that he, or who I didn't say. But honestly, my dad returned to comedy later in life, and it was just a beautiful thing because he wasn't talking old man jokes. He was really still doing the same thing he was doing before. And a lot of young comedians were opening and working with him. And he would sit and he wouldn't listen to what the comedians said. He'd watch the audience. And that was how he gauged was who was hot, who wasn't. So when I look on TV and see young black comedians and black, brown, white saying things I don't even understand, I know the future's in good shape because I shouldn't understand what they're talking about because they're taking things to the next level. We went from 3 channels to thousands of platforms now. So the future is bright, laughter is medicine, and it's a beautiful panel, beautiful group, we're in good shape.
Love that, love it, love it, love it. You guys want to throw any names out there?
Yeah, I have one, and it speaks to what you're talking about in terms of, you know, someone of my generation who I think is, I will pick as the next and the now is Amber Ruffin, who I think is incredible, who is using her platform in just the talent, the passion, the love. I mean, she's come on Saturday Watch Part 2. She's in it a lot. Yeah, so I pick Amber Ruffin.
Mario.
Now, I think I agree with Alonzo with Chappelle, and I mean I have high regard for Chappelle. I think I was just remembering that I told somebody some cheesy line, like I was like, oh, I think Chappelle is like the poet laureate of comedy or something, and DL just laughed in my face.
Oh, DL.
What the fuck are you talking about? The future, the next is Fluffy Iglesias, man. It's like, let's give it to the Latin faction.
Yeah, I would also say Chappelle for now, but I'm gonna take it out of the box a little bit from stand-up, because we talked about comedy as it relates to television, and you see it in this part, you see it in part 2. I really think Quinta Brunson is killing it. She's a brilliant writer, she's hysterical, so
Nword.
she's got it.
I love it. I love Quinta Brunson, and I love her comedy and how she's used it on social media, brought it to TV, and I love this panel. Thank you so much for taking the time